are the people who are in the room? Let's see, I'm not sure of all the people who are here. I'd just like to know.
Anna is here in the orange. Samantha is on the table next to her. Sue
okay.
is right beside the American flag, and Brandy is beside the American Wisconsin flag.
Okay, great. So we've got Craig and Jeremy, that are absent, that maybe will join. All right then, calling the meeting to order at 3:32. Let's see, our first item is the approval of minutes for our June 10th meeting. If anybody has any comments or anything that needs to be changed?
Press the button.
That's right.
I have a couple minor corrections. I used to be an editor and a proofreader, so I can't stop myself sometimes. Like on the second page, under Part B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down where it says there is also. We don't need there is also if you read the rest of the sentence. If you don't, in addition to these 2 sections, an existing park located at Scarlet Drive will be incorporated. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody see what I mean?
Oh, let's see, in addition.
If you took out there is also, it makes more sense.
Okay, so just take that out?
Yeah, and then on the last page, it says forestry assistance instead of assistant, which is Samantha, right? So it should just say assistant on the top line.
Oh, good catch.
Oh, yeah.
And in the next line, it says April, Thursday, August 12th, and we should take out April.
Oh, yeah.
That's all.
Good job.
I have one small correction as well.
Okay.
In a couple places, my last name is misspelled.
Oh, not great.
Which it's not a big deal, but I'm a details person, so it has a D in front of the T in my last name.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 places where it's misspelled. So
it should or should not have a D.
It should have a D.
Okay.
GERHARDT.
Oh, there. Okay.
All right.
Anything else? Okay. Do we have any motions to approve?
I can move that, Sue.
Okay. Any seconds?
Second. And just to clarify, that motion is for the
amended.
With the changes that we mentioned, is that right?
Yeah. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, good. And I'm not there, but do we have any public appearances?
I think we have the new city administrator would like to say hello.
Okay.
You're gonna want me to come out front or just Am I live now? Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to stop by. My name is Chad Brecklin, the new city administrator, and introduce myself. Recognize you folks for all of your commitment to the city, and we certainly appreciate all that you do in your role as commissioners and committee members. It truly takes a city and its members to make government work and our service to our community as a whole work. If there's anything that I can do, obviously, to assist this body, let me know. Like I said, I want to at least stop by and introduce myself, and also thank Anna and Samantha. I don't know if Samantha, you and I have met, but thank them for the work that they do as well in their service. So If anybody has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just sit in the back here and observe.
Thank you for coming.
Anyone?
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful to see you there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. We've got agenda review. Is there anything that needs to be changed, or is everything in the right order?
One quick thing from me, and this is more of like a general thing. In some of my committee meetings, I give a council update at committee meetings, kind of just to share things with the committee that might be interesting in terms of a tree context. And I would like to add that as kind of a regular part of the agenda.
Okay.
Today I'll do it as part of the announcements section, but for the future, I think that would be nice to include that if you're all up for it.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
Okay. All right then. The first item that we have is.
So did people approve the agenda? Did you make a motion?
Okay, do we need a motion on that too? Okay. Craig?
Approval of the agenda.
Making a motion, okay. And Gabriella's second.
Too slow to the mute button.
I saw your hand. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And then our first item is the chair election. It's the first official, formal one that we have done. So our first thing here is to have a nomination. Any nominations for individuals to be chair? It's a 2-year position term.
Yeah, I'll nominate Linda Brewer as the chair. I think she would do a great job in that role.
Okay, and Linda, is that something that you are accepting?
Sure, that would be fine. Thank you.
Are there any other nominations? Okay. Then I think all we do then is vote in favor.
We need a second. We need a second.
Do we need to do motions then?
Yeah, we need
I'll second the nomination.
Okay. All right then. And I think maybe what I'll do instead of doing, well, I guess we can just do a vote in favor. So everyone who's in favor can say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Right? Congratulations, Linda, but also Terrell, thank you so much for your service as chair. We really appreciate I know that's a lot of extra work, so thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying that, Gabrielle. I was about to say that as well. Terrell, you've done a great job. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I called that yesterday, but I will do it again today. Yes,
thank you. Tree preservation ordinance, our big item for today in the budget. So we'll start with the tree preservation. Is that Craig and Linda that are going to lead on that, or Anna?
Yeah, I'll start.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
Since our last meeting, I talked with Valerie, and I sent this in an email update. Feels like an eternity ago now, so it might not be fresh for everybody. But what she said when I talked to her is that what we had in terms of goal and scope and everything like that was really good and useful, but what we would need to move from kind of a conceptual to an actual is a draft of some actual mechanics for this ordinance. So, previously we want to protect the trees and here are some definitions and things, but what we didn't have is, trees over this many inches that are on land that's being subdivided need to go through this approval process. So we didn't really have that level of granularity, which is what Valerie will need before this can kind of come to an actual ordinance. So with that kind of as a starting point, I'd send the email updating everybody on that and suggesting that at this meeting we could talk about some of those mechanics. And then Anna and Sam, I believe, worked on the draft that was circulated yesterday, or not yesterday, a few days ago now, that I emailed about yesterday morning, as a starting point for some of those mechanics. So, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the process going into that document. I wasn't involved with that drafting as much, so.
Basically, what Sam and I did is we sort of took a big picture view of, you know, what we would get, how we could get the most out of a tree preservation ordinance, what would be the best bang for buck, so to speak, and kind of try to put that into language and we try to keep it simple and easy to understand and easy to apply, if that makes sense. So that's what we were going for.
So hopefully by now everybody had a chance to kind of read through this few-page document, because I think it'll be a little bit tough if we're starting to try and read through it for the first time now. But I think a lot of the big mechanic questions that Valerie was getting at are addressed in here, and I think some of them we probably just want to talk through as a committee and make sure that we're in a place that we want to be.
And is the conversation today, do we have a deadline or a timeline that we have a goal for when we want this ready, like to go to a committee, or do we have a few meetings that we're going to address this, or is this like kind of hopefully a final discussion?
Final, I think, is maybe not, I would love it to be the final discussion, but something tells me that that's overly optimistic. What I think would be a good goal for us here is to have, you know, this more or less in a presentable place where all of us as a committee have talked about it and we have some level of agreement. You know, we don't all have to agree on every part of it, but if we have here's kind of what we're trying to present, then after talking with Valerie, she really recommended, and I think this is probably our next step, taking this document to the mayor and saying, here's what we're working on, here's what we're trying to do, because she was strongly of the opinion that we can try and do kind of both directions. We can go from the committee and citizen level up, but also it's a lot more helpful if we start from the top down and say, okay, you know, if we get the mayor on board, then all of the next steps are much easier and smoother, and then we kind of have that cohesive idea from the top down. So I think here what I'd like to go over is just, you know, some of the things that are maybe iffy or question marks, or that I think might merit some discussion, and then after that we'll take this around, and I'm sure there will be changes that come out of other conversations that we might have to readdress, but at least we'll be in kind of a central place. As far as
make an offer that if you want me to pull up the document, share it, and we can make edits, like track changes, edits. Let me know if we want to do that, if there's very specific things. I can pull it up on my computer and do that.
I don't see any reason not to do that unless anybody else has strong feelings. That'd be great, Gabriella.
And just the things that I'm most interested in, people commenting on, are Section 3, the scope and authority of any potential tree preservation ordinance, and also Section 4, the application of it. I think that's really important to be in agreement with before we move forward.
Can I also just add, when I was putting this together, I was reading a lot of other cities' examples of their tree preservation ordinances. So as I was going through, I was just kind of pulling some paragraphs and languages, and a lot of the italicized ones are, like, it gets kind of repetitive. And I really just kind of wanted to present a selection of different language that we could use. So particularly in the scope and authority and application section, there's a lot of repetitive language, but I really wanted to be able to say these are the different avenues, you know, you could house this under. So keep that in mind, that a lot of those paragraphs are just different ways we can use it, if that makes sense.
As we go through also, Sam, really great job pulling this together. I know you put a lot of hard work into this, and I think it's going to make this a much smoother conversation. So thank you for the hard work you've been doing over there. So I'll start off. One thing that that stands out to me that I think is worth discussing is in this section 3, the first paragraph here. We say that this article applies to public property and private property undergoing subdivision. To me, I think this is a strong point to it, which is that I think if a developer's, future people complain about it, it's got the kind of, all right, Fitchburg is also accountable for these same things, because a lot of the projects that happen that involve trees are the public property projects, like the road redevelopments and public areas. So I think that in section 3, that might be one of the things Anna was hoping we could discuss, is just this, like, do we want this to apply to public property as well? And I guess I'll throw it to the group to see if anybody else has kind of thoughts on that.
Why would it not apply?
That's a good question. In some of the other ordinances, it doesn't, just because it's the city holding the city accountable.
So for me, I think it is really important to include public land as well. I agree with Sue, why not? Where I run into a little bit of a quandary is well, I'm thinking about, the road improvements that we do, the road expansions, a variety of things, some of the utility improvements and things that we do. And so, I think we want to include all of those projects, city projects. Then as we go into section 4, how do we include that? Because that's different. It's one thing creating an ordinance for other people, but it seems like for the city, the question is how do we infuse this into all the departments? And is that something done through the ordinance, or are there other ways to do that? So for instance, every professional has an idea of, what standard they would like to see. For instance, with clearance on each side of the road. There are some circumstances when maybe that wouldn't be necessary to have as wide of a clearance when all the variables are taken into account. And trees and tree preservation, I would like to see that as part of what's taken into account when those decisions are made.
To me, it seems logical to include public and private. I think it's a good statement or sentence. It makes things clear, whatever we, agree to in the end.
The only thing that I would suggest is I think it's a good idea to do it that way, but then we need to make sure the city has the capacity to do that work, because right now I don't know that we would have anyone who could take that on from a time perspective.
What piece of the work? The planning part? There's not enough time in your department to be part of all that planning. Is that what you mean?
If we had this ordinance and it was out there and it said, okay, for city projects, it's up to the city forester to do all this tree preservation work, considering we have one part-time forester to do basically the job of city forester and naturalist, and there's only 24 hours in a week allotted to this job, it just probably would be one of the things that didn't happen or didn't happen very well. So I think if I'm fully in support of this being, having that language, I'm the one that put it in there, public, projects, but we do need to keep in mind that there is staff time and implications for that. And if we really want this to be successful, we do need to make sure that we follow it up with the appropriate operating budget for staff.
I think that's a great point on something that I think it's kind of a chicken egg scenario maybe with this a little bit, where we don't currently have the resources to support all of this, but we aren't going to get the resources until we have the statute or ordinance saying we need this. And so which maybe both at the same time is the right answer. Which I actually had also, one thing that I think maybe Linda brought up in a brief conversation we had about this was, and Anna, you might be able to speak to this, would we want public property, private property undergoing subdivision and like big redevelopment efforts to be included here? Or is that a significant enough category that we'd want to call it out? I'm not super familiar with how much that happens, but if a big plot of land isn't really being subdivided, but it is undergoing pretty substantial new work, would we want to word this so that it's included with the understanding that that would also expand the need for forester time?
I think that's not a bad idea.
I think it does sound like something that maybe we could reach out to Sonia at the planning department about the distinction between the nuances between those different categorizations and see if it's necessary.
Yeah, and I may be a little bit ignorant on it, so I don't know if that's actually necessary or not.
When I Googled it, it looked like there was a distinction, and that's why I thought we want to consider it. But yes, that's a good question for her. As I'm thinking about ordinances, I'm thinking about loopholes. I want to avoid loopholes. I want to avoid not the city, but developers or, looking for loopholes to get, to not have to do these things, because I think it's extremely important. So being clear and inclusive is what
And that is also something that I think Valerie is well positioned to help us with. I think, especially if we talk with the mayor and kind of get his buy-in on this, I think it'll be a lot easier to work with her and say, like, here's what we're going for, and make sure no teams of lawyers do this stuff for Congress, and it still ends up with loopholes and things like that. But getting it as well as we can, I think, is definitely something that we should be prioritizing.
Mm-hmm. As it making a good product, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, in terms of, it seemed to me, regardless of whether public property is listed or not, that it looked to me like a lot more work for you anyway. So it looks like some budget implications, regardless of whether we include public land.
You're probably right. Yes.
I don't know if this really matters super much. In the very early stages of this ordinance, I had reached out to a couple of similarly sized cities to try and get their ordinance and figure out, and talked with a few foresters from similarly sized cities in other states, and they have teams of foresters. The fact that we have one part-time person doing it is already a problem, and I don't know whether this might not solve that, right? We might still end up with budgetary restrictions, but we should be pushing for, as a committee, I think, I guess it's okay for people on the committee to feel differently. I feel like we should be pushing for expansion of this role, because it is very important to the community, and the overwork is probably preaching to the choir with Anna, but I think it's definitely a place where we are under-resourced for what we're expecting. So before any of this.
I think that, sorry, going back to the private property, I totally agree with your comments, Craig, and that I'm glad that we're discussing the budget today, because I think this is like a nice two things to discuss at once. Going back to private property, I personally like specifying private property that's undergoing, you know, having to go through the plan commission. Basically, anyone that's having to go through a city process has to be subject to the ordinance. I dislike anything outside of that, mainly because, I mean, I think that gets messier in terms of passing it, but I also think that there's maybe a perception that if the city has control over the trees in terms of what happens to them, I think there's also maybe the perception that the city has the responsibility to manage trees that comes along with that jurisdiction. And I don't think we want to be getting into a situation where we are expected to treat trees for illness, remove trees on private property. So I don't know what other people think about that, if they think that's kind of a slippery, it's kind of a slippery slope argument, but I think it's something to consider.
I think that's a really good point, and probably something that's worth, I don't know if you want to add in, I'm putting a lot on you for the note taking, but maybe put that in as something that, a note here of something that we would want to bring to Valerie's attention as a, like, is this a risk if we're, because you're right, we don't want more people coming back and saying, well, you're allowed to say, well, we can't cut down, so why aren't you also protecting what is there more, which, again, maybe we'd love to if we had unlimited money, but that's clearly not the situation we're in, so.
Well, the other point is if a piece of property is going through either redevelopment or, you know, platting, typically it's changing hands. So it's kind of a good time to do something like this because whomever owns it is going to change it and sell it. And so it's nice to say like, hey, you know, I think the scope comes into play a little bit, but, you know, our intent and purpose kind of comes clear when we say, you know, we have a 30% canopy goal in our comprehensive plan. That's why we want to preserve trees. And, you know, people are going to be living in this development and they're going to want all of the ecosystem services of trees. So it kind of gets back to the why. You know, we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. We're doing it for a lot of different reasons, as outlined, you know, earlier in the ordinance. But I feel like if we're really targeting lands that are going under development or redevelopment, you know, there's a pretty clear and compelling reason to do it, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense to me, at least. Sorry, I cut somebody off.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that maybe the language under 4A might be more appropriate under the scope. This is just, again, another sample language that I pulled from another tree ordinance, but it talks about more specifically to land disturbance activity and kind of covers you know, it's not necessarily public-private, it's just any kind of development happening. We just want to be somewhat involved along the way for the trees.
So this is another place where Craig and I, when we talked about this, I mean, I brought up again, we talked about public land and wondered whether we wanted to add city projects to that 4A list.
And I think that's probably, you know, and Sam, as you mentioned, this could maybe be the kind of alternative to that scope section. The language is kind of an either or. One thing that gets me a little bit about this one that strikes me as maybe too broad is that second, maybe, I think it's the second sentence, be all land disturbance activity, regardless of whether yada yada. I'm wondering if that overreaches a bit into private property in a way that, like, I don't know, that's maybe another valid question, but like all land disturbance activity makes me think of like me as a homeowner. If somebody comes onto my land with a big digger and digs a new hole for something that is included as a land disturbance activity, is what it sounds like to me, with no evidence of whether that's true or not. And I don't think that that's a place we want to get into with this.
No, I would agree, and we wouldn't necessarily know that's happening if there's no permits required. We'd have no way to know that it's even going on. you know, I mean.
Yeah, I'm curious how they do that in the place where this language is from, just because it seems, like you said, if there's no permit, if I'm going in the backyard and digging, the enforcement of that is pretty much impossible, I would think.
Well, and I think we open ourselves up to, you know, having to enforce, you know, neighbor complaints and things of that nature, because it is a little broad, and there is no real way for anyone from the city to know that that's happening if there's no permit required for whatever the activity is.
But I think that first half is kind of maybe just another way of getting at that thing in 3A, and I'm not sure which one works better.
It reminds me of Linda's comment where you're trying to more tackle that loophole effect where you start very, very broad and then you kind of list your exceptions, you know, noted later on. I will say that a lot of the preservation ordinances I read depended on permitting. So that was really common thread through all those ordinances was some kind of permitting set up or piggybacking off of another permitting that already existed. So that is something that we probably have to think about and tailor to Fitchburg in that process.
And Anna might have a different perspective on this, but when I'm envisioning this functioning in real life here is that whenever, you know, the planning commission, whenever they're looking at things like this, they run it past Anna as well. And that's my vague idea of how it would work, but.
Well, I mean, it depends. You know, we have a little PowerPoint to show you later, and I mean, it just depends on the project, and it depends on if I ask the right questions. I mean, often there's projects that happen. I mean, there's an example in McKee Farms Park, and the only reason I found out about it and that there was tree removal involved is because I read the Parks Commission packet and asked some questions. What do you mean you're taking this tree out? Oh, yeah, it's part of the whole project. Really? Like, that's the best tree in the stand. Like, we can't work around this? And, I mean, we'll show you the pictures, and we can talk about that at, you know, a different time. But often, I think partly because I am part-time, you know, things move ahead, and there is no obligation to talk to me, so it often doesn't happen. It's usually me bringing forward the concern rather than someone asking me about a tree removal situation. So,
and that's my I have a big concern for that and how to remedy that.
And I think, Linda, that concern is probably kind of a cultural shift that's needed regardless of any kind of you know, we can pass this, and if nobody reads it and looks at it or pays attention to it, then.
And that's kind of not fair to necessarily expect that without some kind of vehicle for making it inclusive.
well, if there's an ordinance, then there's a reason that they would have to do. There's a reason they would have to do this.
But yeah, we have a kind of backing to go back and complain when it doesn't happen, and a reason to push people for it. Say like, hey, look, this is what needs to be happening, and that's. I do think the language in 4B there probably also will need to be a little bit adjusted, but I think that gets at some of these same ideas of like, if these, I don't know about no building permit, but the idea of maybe like no, I don't know what they would call them. Maybe that's something that, I'm forgetting the name right now. Gabriella, help me out. Who's the planning commission or the?
Oh, Sonia.
Sonia. Maybe Sonia could help us out with like no, subdivision redevelopment or public, there's, I don't know the language there, but something more targeted at what we're saying, like none of those types of permits shall be granted without prior, review.
So part of this is looking at a distinction between what homeowner would normally do in a private property and something we'll really have in mind, which is bigger projects, like a housing development or even a major street construction, reconstruction, improvement, upgrades.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to emphasize, especially once we get to the city council level, just because what everybody is going to think is,
Yeah.
you're not going to stop me from cutting down the tree in my backyard if I want to, kind of thing. And whether or not I think we should be able to do that is irrelevant. That's a much different fight than I think what we're trying to do here. So
that whole area is more about encouragement, not an ordinance for those situations now.
No, I would agree, and I've consulted with municipalities who have those kind of ordinances, and it's a lot of work to enforce it, and often if someone wants to take a tree down, they'll do it and just pay the fine. It doesn't necessarily move the needle, is what I'm trying to say. So I think it might bang for buck not be really what we want to do.
And I think right now we have other strategies like the tree diversity event, and thinking about maybe in the future being able to have more communication with homeowner associations to encourage those kinds, really beneficial tree coverage and tree diversity in personal yards. But that's not the major intent of this ordinance right now.
If we wanted to do something like that, I think creating incentives for protecting your trees would be a better way to go than creating repercussions.
Yeah.
Carrot over stick.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. So then we can put that on our goal list, that whole topic. And I know I also, Craig and I talked about maybe as a committee, just thinking about that comment that was made at our last meeting, that somebody had a lot of heritage trees and was advised that if he cut those trees, his tax rate would go down. And we certainly don't want to people want to have disincentives to preserve trees. We want to work together as departments to encourage that.
Yeah, I think that was a public appearance at the RCC that we went to.
I was going to mention that in my council report.
That's maybe a different topic, but super important for the future, something for the committee to think about too. So.
Is it factual? I mean, is that actually true? Do we know?
Well, so it's not like a direct, I mean, we haven't fact checked him, but I could see how it happened, where if you have a big forest of old growth oaks, your property is worth more, so your tax bill is higher. If you cut them all down, all you've got now is empty land that's not worth as much, so your tax bill would go down. I think there is a tree advisory committee project in the future to counteract that, if that is the case. Like I said, I haven't fact checked it, but I can see logically how that would happen.
I just find that interesting because people who have ash trees that are dying and need to be taken down, it doesn't seem like that property depreciates accordingly. But I don't know.
When I've seen the assessors, I think they're just pretty much dealing with the lot size and the house dimensions and so forth itself.
As I said,
I don't know that they deal with vegetation.
I believe his property is also outside of the urban service area, so I don't know if that plays into what the assessment looks like.
And there's all kinds of tiers of taxation for how rural land is used.
And maybe what he was referring to is if it was open, he could get an ag tax rate, and if it's forested, it's a recreational tax rate, which is a whole different situation.
I think he actually did say recreational in his explanation of it, so that probably is it.
Right, and that, I mean, I don't know this specific situation, and this is the first I'm kind of hearing about this, but that would make more sense than how things are assessed within the urban service area.
Yeah, and I didn't bring it up because it was a complaint that he had that he brought to us because we were the tree advisory people for that meeting, but it wasn't exactly on topic with what we were doing. So
okay.
Speaking of on topic, actually, one question I had for the group that I think is really challenging is in section 5. Anna mentioned briefly that private property people are more likely to just cut the trees and then pay the fine, and I think that's one of my big fears for this is that, if a developer, if we have this enforcement in a way that there's just a fee associated with breaking the rules, then they're going to look at it like, cost benefit. All right, well, it's too much work to move around them, so we're just going to cut them down and then pay the fee.
You bring up an excellent point, Craig, because whoever is preserving these trees, their heart has to be in it, because they could, even if they're like, okay, we won't cut it down, but they damage it during the development process, and it has to come down eventually because it's damaged to the point where it's not going to survive. We're not any farther ahead. And I think there's been examples in the city of Fitchburg, recent developments where the city in the planning process really tried to save trees, particularly oak trees, and they were successful in that. And then when the builders came to build the houses, there really wasn't any control, and a lot of them got beat up to the point where they had to be removed after the houses were built. So, so you bring up a really good point that people have to have skin in the game in order to keep these trees alive and healthy, or it doesn't really get us where we want to go.
And that's maybe this language is the best we can do for that. Like, per the city forester, which sounds like unlimited power, and in reality it wouldn't be, right? There's a level at which the city would allow that, and a certain point at which it would be too much. And I'm not sure I think maybe just getting involved in the planning process up front is the best we can do for now, because I don't know what we can do about if it was damaged during the construction, and it had to be taken out 3 years later. What's the it's a big problem.
And this does happen now, and it's a conversation, and it's kind of a mitigation situation moving forward, and typically it's included in the developer agreement. So I think there are, if we're talking about lands being subdivided, we do have some tools that we could use in regard to saying, okay, we really would like to keep XYZ tree in the landscape. Here's the tree preservation plan. We're going to do everything we can to keep these here. If for whatever reason, whomever's developing that land is negligent for them, being damaged or having to be removed for some other reason, then, in the developer agreement, we put some mitigation, like developers responsible for planting 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or however many trees to make up for that loss. So there's kind of some consequences, I guess, and we do that now, but it's always on case by case, and it's always a negotiation, and I think we could do it.
I just have a quick business question. Do you know how long the budget discussion is going to take?
That's a great point.
How much longer we want to go on this versus shift to the budget because we have 30 minutes?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, Terrell. I feel, unless people have a lot of other things to bring up around this, I don't have too many other things that were on kind of my, good catch, Gabriella. I don't have too many other things on my, to discuss list. The big ones for me was that enforcement and whether we feel like that's strong. So if somebody has more comments on that, and public versus private, those are in my mind, the big things that we really needed to talk about.
Yeah. I just had a few little language edits and some suggested definitions. I could just, who's going to edit it? I could just send it to that person, just scan it and just send an email. Is that okay?
What I can do, Terrell, is I could send you this edited version. And if you want to continue editing it and tracking changes. Oh, okay. Because multiple people can edit the same document.
Send it to whom?
If anyone else wants to take a look and do individual edits, we can all, as long as everyone has a Microsoft Word, we can all do track changes.
Yeah, I guess, Terrell, after you're done, if you want to send it my way, unless somebody else wants to take a crack at it too.
No, that's fine. And do we need to get just committee agreement on a little bit of our timeline and what we need to do next? It sounds like, do we need to maybe meet with Sonia first about some of that language? And then we would be ready to meet with the mayor to talk about it?
I think so. One other really kind of, hopefully quick, I'm sorry, Terrell. No, you rightly pointed out we have another big conversation still.
Sorry.
One other thing that I wanted to bring up that I'm just now remembering is in RCC and I think in the parks, people brought up that they want native trees to be prioritized, which I think is in line with what Anna wants. But my question is if we also want to, we don't want to require native trees, but if we want to put somewhere in here a kind of prioritizing language that says, we are going to work towards more native trees, even if we're not strictly requiring that, because I understand why that maybe isn't the right way to go.
Yeah, sometimes there's specimen trees that are not native, like a buckeye or a red cedar or something like that, that's really, catalpa or something that's just really cool and beautiful and old, but maybe not native. So yeah, we don't want to restrict ourselves too much. We could put something in that makes it maybe like if we're preserving something, but I would think, the judgment of the forester on it, of how special a tree is and its location or whatever would, should be a part of the decision making.
Well, I think the 3 species you mentioned are native, so I don't know. Oh,
they are? They're considered native?
Yes.
Buckeye. Oh, okay.
So I wonder, I don't know that we necessarily have to include native on its own. I think it's already in the definition of, I think it's already in these definitions in terms of
1C, where you have them listed.
Yeah, let's see.
Heritage, specimen, significant, commemorative, or witness.
Yes, specimen or significant may cover it.
Yeah, I mean, like a specimen tree typically, and then is specimen tree, which is they're growing, it's, high value because of its species size, age, historical significance, or other professional criteria. So I think we've kind of got that. It's kind of understood in this.
So I guess then the only thing I wanted to ask is that if people are looking for that, those of us who know less about, actually the terms, is it worth putting in, or does that kind of water it down?
That's kind of where I was coming at it as well, Linda, is that unless, Anna, you think it's a negative to have it included there,
well,
I think there are going to be people who don't understand it as well as you, who look through it and say, well, why aren't native trees included in here? And that's going to be a negative for them, even if it's actually included. Is it harmful to add it in another place just to be really explicit about it?
Right.
Well,
right. I
native to what? Native to Wisconsin? Native to North America? Native, you know what I mean? Like,
well, we would put that in the definition here. Native trees.
I would think people would think native if you're thinking. My automatic thought is Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, and I think we would probably want to say to Wisconsin. And again, I don't think this would be anywhere, we would want to make sure the language isn't a requirement that they be native trees, more of a, we support native trees, which is, I think to everybody on this committee, obvious, right? I think that's not something that many people think needs to be explicit, but 2 different committees that Linda and I sat in on and talked to about the ordinance said, well, why aren't you mentioning native trees?
That's interesting. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
I think it's probably worth mentioning, but we do need to be a little bit careful because in some projects, it isn't possible to preserve some of the forest trees because they can't take the urban environment. So we need to, so it's like even if you didn't kill them in construction, you tried your best to save them, they're just not going to survive with salt and compaction and, without being in a forest environment, they're not going to survive. So we just kind of need to be very mindful of that. And I think we can work it in. It's not a big deal. I don't know that we need to have its own definition, but we could. That's fine. And I think we do need to be a little bit careful because we have, well, I mean, whether you believe in climate change or not, I mean, there are southern trees that are surviving here more than they have in the past. So we just need to kind of be a little bit mindful of that as well.
Yep.
And that's, I think I can take a look at it for a fine wording and run it past you, Anna. But what I'm thinking is just a couple places where we say, we're trying to do native when possible. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be
When
a
possible,
firm
yeah.
commitment, but,
When it's sustainable, yeah.
and I think that'll just, you know, make it more appealing to people who maybe don't have the deeper understanding that that you have or some of the people on this committee have. So
No, and fair enough. And like you say, we do need to be, if people are asking that question, then it's a legit thing that we need to add in. I think we just need to be mindful and do it in a way that doesn't paint us in a corner, so to speak.
yeah, we don't want to say, and Anna will only ever plant native trees.
Right.
Native to this area of Wisconsin.
Wow.
The way the climate used to be, yes.
Yeah, exactly. The way
Weather
has been-
patterns in soil and air quality, right.
Hope none
This
of
is
that
meant to be a
changes.
tool. This is meant to be a tool for Anna to use, not a detriment to for being able to do her job well.
Right.
A tool, not shackles, hopefully.
Right.
Ideally.
Right.
And not misleading people, right.
Well,
Yeah.
right, right, exactly. We don't want to, right, exactly. We don't want to lead people to believe like, hey, we're going to, you know, save this beautiful shagbark hickory and then it's going to grow on a terrace, because it's not. I mean,
It's some-
the tree
that's
won't
some-
cooperate with us.
Yeah, that comes up a lot.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like trees people think they want to save that aren't sustainable or
Right.
desirable.
Well,
or
and the other
create
thing,
more problems for forestry, urban forestry.
well, exactly. And there's no point to save any ash tree. I hate to say it, but the whole Fraxinus genus is something we can't really even consider in this whole thing, because if you don't pump them full of chemicals, they're not going to live. So anyway, and that's a native Wisconsin tree. So we just need to be mindful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think I'm pretty comfortable with everything that we've talked about. I think the next steps in my mind are talking to Sonia to get some of that language nailed down for making sure we're kind of accurate, then bringing it to the mayor, which will happen after the Sonia conversation. And if anybody has any other questions or thoughts that they want to bring up, please, I'm happy to talk to anybody for probably too long about any of this. But I also don't want to take up the budget conversation working on this. So
One last small note, we should consider if we want to bring it to Plan Commission before the actual vote to see if they have any questions. So it's something to consider. We don't have to talk about it, but put it on the
That's
list.
good, yeah.
Yes, I was going to mention that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I guess we're moving on to the budget. Whose topic is this?
Well, I guess I can talk about this if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I emailed you guys the 2021 operating budget that was presented to Park Commission. And, there's not a whole lot to talk about in this, because I really don't know how much wiggle room there is. But just wanted to make you aware that in the past, we've asked for that $25,000 for ash replacements. Last year, it was zeroed out. We asked the council again to consider giving us that money for ash replacements. And you can see here outlined, what money we spend on forestry every year, which is in that 290 account on the first page of the budget. And it's basically we get some money, $4,000 to replace dead trees. And then we get a variety of, and then we get money for neighborhood forestry improvements, which includes emerald ash borer treatments, tree planting, and all of the woods management things that we need to do. So it's right there, and you can see this is Scott's writing, and so we spent about $6,000 on EAB treatment. Last year we had $10,000 to spend on tree planting, so that's what we spent. And then we spent about, roughly $1,500 on woods management, and that's basically tackling invasive species in our larger wooded parks and trying to get native stuff established and try and take care of our big tracts of native trees in our parks. So that's just kind of an FYI. I don't know where this is going to go, and like I said, in the past, we've gotten that $25,000 to replace ash trees. Last year, we did not, so in 2021, we did not have that money to do that. We're asking for it again in 2022. Whether that will happen or not, I couldn't say. And just FYI, it costs us about $300 a tree. Although this year was really different, and I don't know what next year is going to bring. The pandemic has really caused a lot of supply chain disruptions, including in the nursery industry. This year was very hard to come by decent stock, and I think a big part of it is lack of labor and lack of CDL drivers to drive trees and equipment around. So, and you know, we contract all of the tree planting out. So we're kind of at the mercy of, you know, whatever price contractors are getting. And at this moment, as you are well aware, people are working on their homes, people are selling homes, there's a lot of subdivision going on, there's a huge demand for trees. And the nursery industry, it was really devastated in 2008. It's kind of come back, you know, in the last 10, 12 years. It's not what it was prior to 2008, but there's just a lot of demand there and not as much supply as we maybe would like. So anyway, so long story longer, this has been a little bit of an odd year in getting trees. I'm hoping that evens out in coming years, but we are asking for that 25 grand to specifically replace ash trees and maybe get caught up a little bit on infill. Right now we have, you know, we're just like every other municipality, we lose trees to storms, to cars, to, you know, lawnmowers, to all kinds of stuff, and that would help us, you know, replace those trees as well. So that's kind of the part of the budget to kind of be aware of is that 290 account. That's basically the tree planting money, and that's kind of what we're asking for. What will happen, I don't know. The other thing to kind of just be aware of is the staff expenditures. Scott did ask for another day for my position, and we did include the position that Samantha has in this budget. In the past, those requests have not gone anywhere. I don't have any idea how they're going to go this year. This is the first year, 2022, thanks to Gabriella. 2021 was the first year we've had someone in Samantha's position since, I think, 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Every other year, the budget for that has been cut. So, you know, Scott has asked for more hours for my position in the past. I don't have any idea how that's going to play out. He just asked for one more day, and that's, you know, listed in this budget. So that would bring me up to 4 days a week. So from 24 hours to 32, which would be helpful. I don't know, again, how this is all going to play out. I don't have a sense of it. So that's the budget ask for operating for next year. I think Gabriella already shared the CIP stuff, which was really very inspirational, to be honest. I was just so grateful someone's thinking ahead to town of Madison ash situation, which is not going to be pretty. And I was really just so impressed that you know, someone's thinking ahead to that. So that's really great news that made into the CIP. Anyway, I guess if anyone has any questions, you know, I'll answer them as I can. It's somewhat black and white, somewhat cut and dried, so to speak. We just make the ask, and that's kind of how it goes. And I don't really have a sense of, you know, where we're at in any other, you know, in any other way from a budget perspective, if that makes sense.
I'm just going to hop in here and just give a couple things as well. Can I stop sharing this? Has everyone had a chance to look at it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, obviously the department heads, in terms of the process, the department heads submit their budget to the mayor. The mayor makes his decisions, and he releases a budget based on his recommendations. And then that budget is released to both the alders and the public. The alders have some time to look at it, go through it. We do presentations of the department heads, and then the alders are allowed to submit amendments to the budget, which then get discussed in depth at a committee of the whole meeting, in addition to there being a public hearing. And then at a separate meeting, we actually vote on the amendments. And at the beginning of that meeting, there's a public hearing for people to weigh in on the amendments. And then once we vote on the amendments, we adopt the budget, provided that it's within levy limits. So that's kind of just the overall process. And so last year, the forestry LTE position that Samantha's in, that was not included in the mayor's proposed budget. I added that in through an amendment, which was passed. And that required me to find offsets, to reduce it by the amount of the cost of that LTE in order to do it. So all this is to say that the easiest way to get things in the budget is for the mayor to include it in his proposed budget. And when he does not do that, it becomes very difficult to find money that's within our levy limits. Now, I think levy limits are potentially going to be not as much of an issue this year because we have a very high net new construction rate in the city, which is what it's based on. So there will be some capacity, but we don't always want to spend up to the levy limit anyway. So we don't know what that conversation will look like. So that's all to say that right now it's in the mayor's hands. After we have this conversation, I'd love to hear your thoughts just so I can hear, even if it's all just we support this proposed budget, because I'm happy to bring that to the next council meeting and tell the mayor that this is what we've discussed and this is what we're requesting, because he does ask us to weigh in on what we'd like to see. And I've already talked a little bit about solar power, but if this committee really wants to see this budget proposal that we just talked about today, I'm happy to bring that to council and talk to the mayor directly.
I'm totally on board with your doing that. I think that's important and valuable.
Yeah, and it seems like, inches rather than miles for the expansion of some of these things that we really need is better than trying to go from, the 24 hours a week to a full-time thing with an extra person. I think this makes a lot of sense. Is what I'm trying to say in my roundabout way.
And I also think it's critical to get more resources and more time for on his position and assistance in doing all of this. If we want to do what's needed, it's critical. So that would be great.
Also, I'm pretty sure we've said it before, but kudos to you, Gabriella, for getting that Sam's position last year, because that's a big deal. So
really big deal.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
And one thing just to keep in mind, I think, the city's changed a lot since 2001, and the job that I'm holding now, it's, even though the position description has changed, the hours have not changed since then. And if you think about what the city was like at the, at the turn of the millennium and what it's like now, it's a whole different situation. We didn't have nearly as much new development at that time, which does take a lot of time. And also we have to tackle things like emerald ash borer, and we have gotten almost no resources to deal with that pest. It's the worst pest this continent's ever seen. And we're trying to take it on, but if we don't continue to work on that, like as much as we do and more, it's gonna start managing us, and there's gonna be some pretty serious implications to that. So I feel like, we're not asking for more staff or more money just, to do these pet projects. We're asking to do things that really actually do need to be done.
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat that date, Anna, in terms of what
I believe
the year you started?
Well, this job started in, I believe, 2000 or 2001, and it was part-time at that time, and the original idea was to get, I think it was the DPW at the time just needed a forester to keep up with, everything that was going on around the city at that time, and it was a 24-hour-a-week job, and it was fine at that time, and it was, and it's, and it's super busy. The thing is, for me, it's really kind of two jobs, because I'm the urban forester and the naturalist, which is fine, but, managing our natural areas is really important, and we end up, not doing maybe as good a job with that as we'd like to, because we just don't have the staff hours to put into it. So at any rate, it's we've grown a lot. We've gotten a lot of new property and new responsibility in that time. And the other aspect too is, as urban forest here matures and grows, it does need more care. Things like, pruning and removing dead wood and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and just knowing how to deal with some of those things in a proactive way is really important to maintaining those trees so they don't get to the point where they fall over. There's a lot, because my eye is so much on new developments and emerald ash borer, that's kind of what takes up most of my time. There's a lot of stuff that's not getting done from a forest management perspective, from a bigger picture, and at some point it's going to catch up with us one way or another, either in a proactive way or not. You either manage trees or they manage you. That's just kind of how it works.
So do we need to make a motion or anything, Gabriella, for what you're planning to do? No?
I mean, I don't think so. I'm happy to, I mean, I guess we could, if you guys wanted to like just vote and say that you're in support of this budget proposal, but that's not in the agenda, so I guess I'm not 100% sure what the procedure is.
Huh.
But I mean, could everyone else, I mean, that it's in the chamber, confirm that you're interested, you're in support of this budget proposal
Yes.
we discussed?
Yes,
Yes.
100%.
I appreciate that as a question though, Sue, because I'm always curious what the appropriate procedure is, and I rarely know, so.
And in terms of, we just have very few minutes left, so do we have any brief report from the department and then announcements?
I included, both Sam and I included a written report to you, so hopefully you were able to get that. I emailed it out, and it was also part of the meeting packet. That kind of outlined what we've been doing, and just some highlights, if you're curious, include, we had, you know, kind of, I thought, a successful tree diversity event in Quarry Hill Park. That was a joint effort with RCC, and, you know, we did a lot of Emerald Ash Borer work this last month. We got almost 135 trees treated and identified, 20-ish for removal. And we're starting to kind of identify what we need to treat for next year, and kind of hoping and, you know, getting that all lined up. So I don't know. I mean, it's all there. We wrote it all down. So if you're interested, you can take a look at what we've been doing.
Okay. Any announcements?
One thing I was wondering, so our next meeting is scheduled for September 9th. Thank you very much. We only have one more meeting scheduled for this year. Did we want to maybe do we think from a tree preservation ordinance perspective, we wanted to maybe put that meeting off till October till we had more time to work on this? Or did you guys want to meet again in September? Or how are people feeling? I mean, tree preservation ordinance has kind of been the big topic, and I don't know if folks are feeling like they're going to need more time to get things together before we discuss it again, or, you know, it's kind of up to what the committee thinks. And if people are available to meet in October, I don't know.
I think to have momentum going and us remembering things, September is good, but for those of you who are doing some legwork in between, is that enough time for you?
I don't have a good sense for whether there's two meetings that I want to take place between now and then, right? With Sonia and with the mayor.
Right.
It seems plausible that we could get through both of those before the next time we meet. Gabriella, I don't know if I've never met with the mayor, so I don't know how busy his calendar is. Probably not super open, but
it all depends on the time of year. But I mean, I'm sure that it'd be better to ask ASAP this week and see if you can get on the schedule, and we can,
So Craig, I would need to do it before the first week of September, because I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks, so I can still participate in the meeting, but I can't, you know, I want to be there when we meet with Sonia and the mayor.
And Labor Day is happening too, and I know a lot of people travel at the end of the summer as well before school starts.
Thanks for that reminder in the chat, Scott. Looking out. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe pushing back to October is more realistic. I like the idea of trying to get it through fast while we have momentum. I would love to commit to that, but I have a baby due in 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
So I will not necessarily commit to being at my full for that time. So.
You'd be a little busy. Yeah.
So maybe October is better from my perspective, but whenever works for everybody else makes sense. So.
That would work better for me, I think.
Let's do October. That might be my take.
Yeah.
Does that work for everyone else?
What is the day, October?
If I'm lucky, I won't be here then.
Okay. As in you'll be
I'll be going somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay.
Is it the 7th?
Let's take a look here. It would be.
The first Thursday?
That's Park Commission, so we're second.
Okay, second.
Looks like it would be the 8th? Or no, it would
14th?
be. 14th? Yeah.
14th of October?
13th.
Yeah.
Well, 13th is a Wednesday, so I think we would be the 14th potentially.
Yes, it is the 14th. The second Thursday is the 14th of October.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works fine for me.
That works for me.
Yep.
Sue, are you going to be on vacation or are you going to be somewhere? I don't at all feel obligated to call in, but since it looks like we might still be doing remote.
Are you talking to me? Is he talking to me?
He is.
If I'm lucky, I'll be in Portugal.
All right, that might be tough.
Oh, my
But
goodness.
I'm not holding my breath, so we'll see.
That sounds nice, though. I'm rooting for you.
We have a couple minutes, but are we off at 4:45?
Yeah.
Okay, I can do I just want to do a quick council update if that's okay. I can do very quickly.
We'll put it on the agenda next time.
Yes, there was a resolution at council, was that 2 nights ago? It was a plan commission approval and there was the need to remove a specimen tree.
Yes.
But my understanding based on the conversation was that specimen tree was dead and dying and falling over. That was what was communicated to me. I was a little bit hesitant because I was worried that the tree was not dead and I didn't have like a memo from the city. Can you confirm that, Anna?
Sure. So if I had my druthers, I would have liked to have kept that tree. It did since fall over, so I guess I was maybe not 100% right, but my take on it was, okay, so long story longer, and I know we don't have a lot of time. Basically, that development, there were 5 trees in the 120 acres, or however big that development is, there were 5 trees that were slated to be kept. Really, I had said at the beginning, hey, these are great trees. However, they're all very old. They're at the end of their life. Why don't we pick trees that are awesome specimens, that have a longer runway, that are more in that 80 to 100-year-old age range instead of 240 or whatever. Of course, I lost that argument, and they picked these 5 trees. Of those 5 trees, I think 2 are left, and this last one was one of them. But I fought it. I fought as much as I could. I fought the removal of that tree and the changing of that to a lot. And I said, okay, if you're going to do that, then we need something from you, Mr. Developer. And we got 3 trees from him, in theory. So that's kind of how that played out, sort of. And the tree, they had Bruce Ellison go out and say it was in terrible shape, and it kind of was. I mean, that's not a fib. I just would like to have it come down on its own, which it ended up doing anyway. So in this last storm. So yes, it's.
Just in the sake of this, good to know. I actually might follow up with you, Anna, about that. I did tell the council and the mayor that I would like these things to come to tree advisory unless there's some sort of timeliness. Yes. And I was like, we are organizing more. We want to see resolutions.
Yes, I agree.
Unless there's any reason why not.
I agree. Yes,
I absolutely. Did pass that because I trusted the information I was getting at the time. But I wish I had a chance to talk with Anna beforehand. Anyway, let's follow up on that.
Yes. Happy to follow up with you. Yes.
2 more quick things. Lot 53 and 54, which is adjacent to McKee Farms Park, it's basically along Wilshire Drive and Chapel Valley Drive. That is in the process of, a developer has looked in buying it and is working on a development plan for it. It'll be like a memory care facility and an assisted living facility. So it'll basically be on the park. There are a lot of trees in that area. Yes. And there was a neighborhood meeting last night where people were asking about how those trees are going to be preserved, if it's on city land, if it's on private land. So I wanted to flag that for the committee. That's going to start going through city processes in September. And I would like to touch base with Anna in case she hasn't had this on her radar. I will follow up on that. And we talked about the Mark Jones comment at RCC. I am going to look into that assessing problem and see if there's anything that needs to be done about it. And then last thing, at Resource Conservation Commission on Monday, there was this great presentation by the South Central Invasives Partnership. It's a new partnership about working with invasive species. And I'll go ahead and send you the video of that because I thought you all might find it interesting. And that's all.
Oh, good, thank you.
Okay, super. So we need a.
Can I just add one quick more? Can I just add one quick more thing? Talking about McKee Farms Park and tree preservation, there is a really nice tree coming down, slated to come down on McKee Farms Park to make room for a pathway from the splash pad to the new potential inclusive playground. If you were interested to know more about that, I can fill you in. We were going to show you a PowerPoint, but we kind of ran out of time, so we can do that next time. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay,
Yeah, if they're always the last thing on what's being considered, none of this is gonna work, so.
Right, 100% right on.
okay.
Anyway,
I'll
So-
move to adjourn.
Yeah, thank you. Any second?
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned.
Sorry, Scott.